In this quick tutorial, I'll show you how to fetch data from an API using pure JavaScript. No frameworks, no libraries. We will build a small app that loads a random code from a public API. So let's get started. First, let's create a basic HTML structure with a button and a place to display the code. So I already have my basic HTML structure ready. Now in this structure I am going to add a button, and this button will be responsible for the trigger to the API, which means that when I click this button the API call will be made, and I would call this button as load quote. And now to identify this button I would give it an ID, and I would also call it load quote but with a hyphen in between. And then the next step is I want to display this code somewhere, so I would need a p tag. Now this p tag will also need an ID, and I will call this as quote. And initially there will be no quote, so I want some placeholder in its place, and that would be your quote will appear here. Okay, so initially there's a button and there's a p tag which does not have any quote as of yet, and if I run this HTML file in my browser, I see the button and I see the p tag, the line that I added. And now we want the API fetch call to happen when the button is clicked. So now that we want to get to the functioning of our API, we would need a script to execute the call. So we add a script tag in place, and now we want the call to happen when the button is clicked. For that we would need the reference of the button. So we would get the button in a variable. I'm calling it as, let's call it as quote button. And how will we get the button? We'll get the button from the ID. So document.getElement by ID, and I pass the ID of the button, which is load quote. And then when I have the button, I would add an event listener to the button, and the event would be click event, and we would execute a callback function when the button is clicked. And now comes the main part of this tutorial, fetching the data from the API. So to do that, all we got to do is write fetch, which is provided natively by JavaScript itself, and inside this fetch we are going to pass the URL of the API. Now for this tutorial we're using a publicly available API that would give us a random code. So I entered the URL of that API, https dummyjson.com/quotes/1. This gives me a random code and it returns a response first. So it gets me a response, and it won't get me a response this way. I forgot. This returns a promise, and I have to handle this promise. So to handle the promise I use a then callback. And then here is where I get the response. And once I get the response, this response has an OK attribute which lets me know if this was a success or not. So first I will check for that. So response.OK should be the ideal state, but if it is not OK, which means that something went wrong, then I will have to throw this error. So I do throw new error, and here I would just write a message to be shown. So I would write network response was not okay. This would happen when there's some failure and the response was not okay. But if the response is okay, then we will return response.json. So response.json gives me the actual data from this response. But now my task was to display the code here. How do we do that? So this response.json is itself a promise once again. So as I said, once there is a promise, we need to handle that promise. So to handle this new promise, we again need a then callback, which gives us the data. Alright, so let me show what the data looks like. So here we're just going to log the data. Coming back to our browser, I refresh the screen, and now when I click this button, it should make a call. And yes, it did make a call. I can verify the same from the network tab. And then this is what the data it gave me. It gave me one random code, and it gave me the code that I want to display. And now to display this code in the p tag, all I need to do is document.getElementById, and then I would pass on the ID of the p tag, which is quote, and I want to set inner HTML or inner text to it, and that would be data.quote. Again, refreshing it, it shows the placeholder right now, and when I click the button, it fetched the quote, and it's now displaying the quote in the p tag. Okay, now we have to make one change in the API. The one here would give us the quote with the ID 1. If we want a random quote each time, we would change 1 to random. So now it should give me a code that I have never seen before. And yes, it did. Brooding over blunders is the biggest blunder. I click on it again, and it gave me another different code this time. So our API is working as expected. Now, when we were logging the data, we saw that it gave us one more information. So if I click on the button and I see what it gave me, it gives me the code, but it also gives me the author. I can display the author here too. So to display that, we would need another p tag. This would be empty initially. Let's keep it empty without a placeholder, and we would give it an ID called author. And now when we are getting the data, we would do document.getElementById author, which is the ID of the new p tag that we added, inner HTML data.author. And yeah, now if we try it again, yeah, we got the code and we got the author. Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. So now we're getting both our code and our author. We can now style this content to make it look better. So to add some styles, we would add a style tag in the header, and here let us style the page. So first I would want to style my body. I want all of it to be in the center of the screen, so I would manipulate the width to be 50%, so that it's only 50% width of the page. And then to move it into the center, I would give it margins on both sides. So to give it margins on both sides, I would do 0 auto. 0 is the top and bottom margin, and auto is the left and right margin. So what 0 would do is, it would give us 0. It would mean that on top and bottom of the body no margin would be applicable, and auto would mean that there would be automatically adjusted margins on the left and right of this body. And now if I refresh, yep, it did work. Now it is sticking very much to the top, so we need some margin on the top and bottom, so maybe we can give it 20 pixel, or maybe let's increase it to 50. Yeah, and now we still want it to be more in the center, so to do that we can give it another class, text align center, and now it's on the center of the page. And now I want my code to stand out a bit, so to do that I would give so to style the code you use hash code, and then I increase the font size to 50 pixel because that is my code. We can even get rid of the placeholder like we did for author, so that there would be nothing initially, but when I click on it my quote appears and my author also appear. We can increase the font size for the author too, but we don't want it as big as the quote itself, so maybe 20 pixel should be enough. And now this time when I press the button I get my quote and the author. And that is how easy it is to fetch API data in JavaScript. You can use the same pattern for any API. It can be weather API, it could be an API on jokes, it could even be API on GitHub data, whatever you like, whatever your use case is. If you found this helpful, give this video a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what API should we try out next.